Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. A navy blue Lincoln Continental convertible slowly crosses Dealey Plaza. Inside it, the most charismatic president in American history waves to the crowd. Seconds later, shots echo. The world stops, and that car becomes forever part of history. But did you know that even after this tragedy, American presidents continued choosing the Lincoln Continental as their official vehicle? What makes this car so special? Why did it capture the hearts of so many leaders of the most powerful nation in the world? Get ready to discover the secrets, the brutal engineering, and the epic moments of the most presidential car of all time. It all began in 1939. But not in a factory, rather in the visionary mind of one man, Edsel Ford, son of the legendary Henry Ford. Edsel didn't want just another luxury car. He wanted art on wheels, something that would make millionaires stop in the middle of the street just to admire it. And that is exactly what he created. The first Lincoln Continental was born as a personal project for his vacation in Florida. When he appeared driving that elegant machine with lines that seemed sculpted by the wind, the Palm Beach elite went crazy. Everyone wanted one. And so, in 1940, the Lincoln Continental was officially launched to the public. The design was revolutionary. While other cars looked like boxes on wheels, the Continental had smooth curves, an elongated hood that seemed endless, and that spare tire mounted on the rear, which became its visual signature. It was as if a luxury yacht had transformed into an automobile. But it wasn't just beauty. Beneath that elegant body roared a 292 cubic inch V12 engine, producing 120 horsepower. For the time, it was raw power disguised as sophistication. The car measured more than 5 meters in length and weighed nearly 2 tons. Driving a Continental was like commanding a ship. You didn't simply drive, you sailed through the streets with absolute authority. The interior was a sanctuary of luxury. Seats upholstered in genuine leather, panels made of noble wood, chrome finishes that shone like jewelry. There was room for 5 adult passengers to sit comfortably, with a generous trunk for luggage. The suspension was so soft it seemed to float over the asphalt, and the interior silence almost religious. Lincoln engineers obsessively insulated every external noise. When you closed those heavy doors, the outside world simply disappeared. It was a cocoon of power and tranquility. In the 40s and 50s, the Continental became the car of millionaires, Hollywood stars, and business magnates. But it was in the 60s that it would reach its truly legendary status. And it all began with a young president named John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In 1961, when JFK took office, he wanted a car that represented the new America, young, bold, powerful. The choice was obvious, a Lincoln Continental. But not just any Continental. It would be the most advanced presidential car ever built.
The limousine was nicknamed SS-100X. It was based on the 1961 Continental, but transformed into something far beyond. The car was stretched to an astonishing 6.5 meters in length. The weight jumped to more than 3.5 tons, even before security modifications. Under the hood, a 430 cubic inch V8 engine, producing 345 horsepower. This monster could accelerate that gigantic machine from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in less than 10 seconds. The top speed exceeded 200 kilometers per hour. In an emergency, that tank on wheels could fly. The interior was completely redesigned. Electrically adjustable seats covered in the finest leather available, a silent air conditioning system, telephones and encrypted communication systems connecting the president directly to the Pentagon. But the most iconic feature was the retractable convertible roof. Kennedy loved calming crowds with the top down, waving to the American people without barriers. That closeness, that direct connection was part of his charisma, and it was precisely that openness that would tragically prove fatal. November 22, 1963. That day began sunny in Dallas. Kennedy was optimistic, smiling. The SS-100X was flawless, shining under the Texas sun. At 12:30 in the afternoon, as the presidential motorcade crossed Dealey Plaza, gunshots tore through the air. The president was hit. The Lincoln Continental accelerated desperately toward the hospital, but it was too late. John Kennedy died in that rear seat. The car that symbolized power and hope became, in seconds, a coffin on wheels. The world went into shock, and everyone expected that Lincoln to be retired, perhaps sent to a museum as a dark relic. But no, what happened next shocked many people. The SS-100X was completely rebuilt. Lyndon Johnson, the new president, ordered the car to be transformed into the safest mobile fortress on the planet. The limousine was sent to Detroit, where engineers worked feverishly. Titanium armor plates were installed throughout the body. The convertible roof was replaced by a bulletproof transparent canopy made of laminated glass 5 centimeters thick. The total weight jumped to 4.5 tons. To compensate, the engine was replaced with an even more powerful 460 cubic inch V8, producing 345 horsepower. Think about this for a moment. Instead of abandoning the car of tragedy, they transformed it into a symbol of resilience. The message was clear: the American presidency does not bow to terror. The modified Lincoln Continental returned to active service in 1964 and continued transporting presidents until 1977. Johnson used it, Nixon used it, Ford used it, Carter used it. 13 years after that terrible day in Dallas, the same car was still protecting the nation's leaders. This is not just automotive history, it is pure symbolism of power.
But let's talk about the later generations of the Continental, because the story doesn't stop in '63. In 1961, Lincoln launched the 4th generation of the Continental, and it was absolutely brutal in size and luxury. The model had suicide doors, those that opened backward, creating a theatrical and majestic entry. Imagine a president stepping out of that car, the doors opening in opposite directions like wings, creating a portal of power. It was cinematic. The trunk could easily accommodate 10 large suitcases. The fuel tank had a capacity of 95 liters, because when you command the free world, you don't have time to stop at gas stations every hour. The drivability was surprisingly smooth for a car of that size. Air suspension, optional in some models, practically eliminated any feeling of road irregularities. The brakes were oversized, with ventilated discs on all 4 wheels in the most advanced versions. You were driving nearly 2.5 tons of steel, leather, and wood, but you could stop with the precision of a sports car. The power steering system allowed maneuvering that beast with just 2 fingers. It was American engineering at its peak, brute force domesticated by technology. Let's talk about numbers that impress. The 1966 Continental, for example, was 5.5 meters long and 2 meters and 10 centimeters wide. The rear passenger legroom was larger than many residential sofas. You could literally cross your legs and still have extra space. The wheelbase exceeded 3 meters and 30 centimeters, guaranteeing brutal stability at high speeds. And when we say high speeds, we're talking about a car that, even weighing nearly 3 tons fully loaded, could easily surpass 180 kilometers per hour in a straight line. Of course, it consumed gasoline like a jet, perhaps achieving 6 or 7 kilometers per liter, but when you are President of the United States, energy efficiency is not exactly your biggest concern. The presidential versions had even more extreme features. Satellite communication systems were installed as early as the 70s, decades before this became common. Secret compartments for weapons and emergency equipment, sealed oxygen tanks in case the car needed to cross contaminated areas. Yes, engineers literally planned for nuclear war scenarios. The Presidential Continental was not just a car, it was a mobile bunker, an Oval Office on wheels, and a political statement at the same time. When the American president arrived anywhere in the world in that Lincoln, the message was unmistakable. Here comes power. Now pause for a second and think with me. You just discovered that the same car in which JFK was assassinated continued serving presidents for 13 more years. That this vehicle was simultaneously a work of art, an engineering marvel, and a political symbol. So tell me, what do you think about the decision to rebuild the SS-100X instead of retiring it? Was it a gesture of courage and resilience, or was it disrespectful to Kennedy's memory? Leave your opinion in the comments because this still divides opinions today. The 70s marked an interesting transition. Lincoln continued producing magnificent Continentals, but the world was changing. The 1973 oil crisis forced even luxury car manufacturers to rethink their designs. The Continentals began to shrink slightly in size, although they were still giants compared to European and Japanese cars. The fifth generation, launched in '75, tried to balance luxury with a touch of efficiency. But make no mistake, it was still a 5'30" monster with an available 460 cubic inch V8. It could still transport 6 people in absolute comfort. It still had that intimidating presence on the streets.
Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter used Continentals during their presidencies, although less frequently than their predecessors. Cadillac was beginning to gain ground as the official supplier of presidential limousines. But the Continental maintained its prestige. Business executives, diplomats, celebrities, and heads of state around the world still saw Lincoln as the definitive standard of American luxury. It was the car you bought when you had reached the absolute top, when you no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, when your only concern was gliding through the streets in maximum comfort. Safety features also evolved constantly. In the 70s, airbags began to be experimented with, ABS brakes were introduced, and traction control systems became more sophisticated. Lincoln was always at the forefront of these technologies, often testing innovations in presidential versions before releasing them to the public. The Continental was literally a laboratory on wheels. Every advancement that worked in a presidential limousine eventually reached commercial models. You, driving a regular Continental, were experiencing technology developed to protect the leader of the free world. That is status on a stratospheric level. But all golden eras eventually end. In the 80s and 90s, Lincoln began losing ground. Tastes changed. Luxury SUVs began dominating the market. European cars like Mercedes and BMW stole customers who were once loyal to Lincoln. The Continental continued to be produced, with some brilliant generations and others forgettable, but it never again reached that magical combination of cultural influence, presidential presence, and absolute dominance of the luxury segment that it had in the 60s. The last generation of the Continental was discontinued in 2020, ending 80 years of history. Today, classic Continentals are treasures for collectors. A 1961 model in perfect condition can easily be worth more than $100,000. Special versions with interesting provenance can reach much higher values. And what about the SS-100X, Kennedy's car? It is permanently retired at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, where millions of visitors come to contemplate that piece of history. It is not just a car, it is a monument, a reminder of glory, tragedy, resilience, and the enduring power of exceptional design. The Lincoln Continental proved something fundamental. A car can transcend metal and mechanics to become a symbol. Every curve of that body tells a story. Every centimeter of that luxurious interior represents an era when America built things bigger, bolder, and more magnificent than the world had ever seen. When you look at a Lincoln Continental, you don't just see an automobile. You see decades of presidents, of decisions that changed the world, of historic moments captured in chrome and steel.
You see what happens when engineering, luxury, and power meet in perfect combination. And here is the final truth. Even with all modern technology, with all the armored SUVs and hybrid sedans that transport world leaders today, none of them have that aura, that presence, that absolute magnetism that made people stop on sidewalks just to watch a Lincoln Continental pass by. It wasn't just transportation, it was theater. It was art in motion. It was America proclaiming to the world, we know how to create greatness. Thank you for staying until the end of this epic journey through the history of the Lincoln Continental. If you're passionate about classic cars, presidential history, or simply love when engineering and luxury meet in spectacular ways, you are in the right place. Because we have many more fascinating stories about automotive legends yet to come. Cars that changed wars, vehicles that broke impossible records, machines that defied physics itself. This is just the beginning. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us in exploring the secrets of the most incredible cars ever built. Until the next legend.